The man who bought me thought he was paying for silence. I smiled, because silence is my most dangerous skill. They called me Lot E17, not Elias, not him. Just a number projected in thin white letters above the glass capsule where I stood barefoot. Hands relaxed at my sides, posture calibrated to look compliant, but not broken. They liked that balance. Too defiant, and the price dipped. Too obedient, and they assumed damage. Genetically modified Omega, the voice announced, smooth and bored. Cognitive enhancement, emotional dampening, no prior bonding. Laboratory raised, optimal compatibility rating. I listened to myself being described the way one might list features of a luxury car. Engine, mileage, accident history. No mention of what happens when the engine decides it no longer likes the road. The glass around me was flawless, transparent, soundproof, reflective. I could see the room and not see it at the same time. The bidders were hidden behind mirrored walls, their bodies erased, their interest reduced. To reflections, a twitch of fingers, the tilt of a head, the glow of augmented lenses. Men with money rarely like to be seen wanting. My heart rate stayed steady, 62 beats per minute. Perfectly acceptable. I let my gaze drift lazily across the reflections, cataloging without interest. Alpha signatures were easy to read if you knew what to ignore. Posture. Breath. The way they leaned forward when the price jumped. Most of them were eager in the same dull way, hungry, but certain the meal wouldn't bite back. Then I saw him. He didn't lean forward. His reflection stayed still, dark against the light. A tall man in a tailored black suit, hands loose at his sides, head slightly inclined as if he were watching something mildly entertaining. No augmented lenses, no visible impatience. He wasn't performing interest for the room. That was what made him dangerous. Opening bid, the voice continued.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
Numbers began to climb. Efficient. Predictable. I didn't look away from him. I felt it then. The shift. Not in the room, but in me. A small, deliberate adjustment, like turning a blade just enough to catch the light. I raised my chin a fraction, letting my eyes meet his reflection directly. Most buyers didn't like that. They wanted the illusion of control, not a reminder that what they were buying could see them. He didn't flinch. If anything, his mouth curved, barely. Not a smile. An acknowledgement. Interesting, I thought clinically. The bidding accelerated. Someone got impatient. Another bidder overcorrected, pushing the price higher than necessary. I tracked it all without reaction, my breathing slow, my expression neutral. The handlers loved that. Calm stock sold well. Then, just as the auctioneer prepared to close, the man in black lifted one finger. The room stilled. He named a number that didn't just win, it ended the conversation. No flourish. No glance around to gauge reactions. He didn't need to. Sold, the voice said. The glass hummed softly as the capsule unlocked. Somewhere, contracts were being finalized, credits transferred, ownership reassigned. Efficient. Clean. I stepped forward when prompted, every movement smooth, unhurried. I felt his eyes on me now, not through a reflection, but directly. Up close. His presence was even quieter than I'd expected. No aggressive scent. No alpha posturing. Just certainty. You're calm, he said, as if commenting on the weather. So are you, I replied. My voice sounded exactly as designed. Pleasant. Measured. His gaze sharpened. I didn't expect you to speak first. I looked at him fully then, and allowed myself a small, genuine smile, the kind that comes before a long game. Neither did you, I said. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise. Interest. As they led me away, the glass walls reflected us both. Buyer and purchase, Alpha and Omega, perfectly framed. He thought he had won. I was already calculating how long it would take before he realized this wasn't an acquisition. It was an invitation. The legal office was colder than the auction hall, though I doubted the temperature had changed. Glass did that. It made every space feel like a display case. The table between us was a single flawless sheet, translucent and touch-responsive, projecting lines of text in pale blue light. The contract scrolled slowly, clause after clause unfolding with deliberate calm. Morgan Black sat across from me, jacket unbuttoned now, posture relaxed. He looked like a man settling into something he already owned. Standard private acquisition agreement, he said. No physical coercion, no branding, no irreversible conditioning. Generous, by the industry's standards. I placed my hands on the table. My reflection shimmered beneath my fingers, fractured by lines of text. You make it sound charitable, I said. His mouth twitched. I prefer efficient. The contract was thorough, restrictive but elegant in its cruelty. Curfews, surveillance consent, behavioral expectations carefully phrased as recommendations, incentive structures disguised as privileges, nothing overtly violent, nothing illegal, total control, achieved politely. I read every word. Morgan noticed around page 3, his gaze sharpened, the faintest crease appearing between his brows. Most acquisitions skimmed. They trusted the handlers, the templates, the lawyers paid obscene amounts to make sure ownership felt seamless. I paused at a clause and tilted my head. This section on compliance triggers. They're safeguards, he interrupted smoothly. You won't notice them unless you decide I've failed to meet expectations, I finished, eyes still on the text. Which you define, a beat. You're observant. I was designed to be. I scrolled back up, then down again, fingers precise. The glass warmed under my touch. There it was. A small thing. Almost elegant. A clause meant to protect the buyer from liability that did something else entirely. I looked up. You left choice intact. Morgan leaned back slightly. I didn't leave anything. I smiled, not wide, just enough. Clause 12, subsection C. Behavioral autonomy in non-conflicting domains. He followed my gaze, reading now with more attention than before. That's standard language. Yes, I agreed. And very generous of you. His eyes lifted to mine. You think you found a loophole? I think you've mistaken obedience for proximity. Silence stretched between us, thin as glass. You're an omega, he said calmly. Not a reminder. A statement. By documentation, I replied. Not by inclination. Another flicker. This one unmistakable. Morgan folded his hands on the table. You're confident for someone who was just purchased. I leaned forward, closing the distance by a few deliberate inches. Not enough to challenge. Enough to register. You didn't buy obedience, I said softly. You bought proximity. The words landed exactly where I intended. For a moment, I wondered if he'd be angry. Alphas often were, when the illusion cracked. When the thing they owned spoke like it understood the rules better than they did. Instead, Morgan laughed. A quiet sound. Genuine. Interesting, he said. Most people try to negotiate their freedom. I'm not negotiating, I replied. I'm clarifying expectations. And what do you expect? He asked. I considered him. The calm. The certainty. The faint thrill under it all. To be watched, I said. Closely. His smile returned. Slower this time. You will be. The contract pulsed, awaiting confirmation. I placed my thumb against the signature field, feeling the hum of the system recognize my biometrics. My name appeared in clean digital script. Elias. Morgan signed beneath it without hesitation. The table dimmed. The deal sealed. As we stood, he regarded me with open curiosity now, not ownership. You know, he said lightly, you could have tried to be more agreeable. I met his gaze, my own calm settling into something sharper. Where would the fun be in that? The glass around us reflected two figures standing on equal ground, for now. And for the first time since the auction, I felt it clearly. Anticipation. Morgan's house didn't feel lived in. It felt observed. The structure rose from the hillside like a deliberate statement. Planes of glass and steel layered with architectural precision. No curtains. No soft edges. Light flooded every room, refracted and multiplied until shadows had nowhere to hide. If the auction hall had been a display case, this was the showroom. I stepped inside and catalogued. Floor, polished stone, low thermal retention. Walls, reinforced glass, electrochromic, capable of opacity on command. Ceiling, recessed lighting, adjustable spectrum. Cameras, visible and hidden, track my movement with polite accuracy. No wood. No fabric thicker than a chair cushion. No warmth. A laboratory masquerading as a home. Impressive, I said, letting the words sit neutrally between us. Morgan closed the door behind us. I value transparency. I can see that. I moved slowly, deliberately. Each step measured. Not because I was afraid of being watched, but because I wanted to see how I was being watched. My reflection followed me in every surface, fractured and reassembled at different angles. Elias multiplied into dozens of compliant silhouettes. I noted the routes without appearing to. Hallway intersections. Camera blind spots masked by sculptural installations. A half-second delay near the staircase where the system recalibrated. Interesting. You're quiet, Morgan observed. I'm adjusting. To what? To the variables. He studied me openly now, no pretense of disinterest. Most Omegas react differently on their first day. I stopped near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Glass between me and everything I couldn't reach. How so? I asked. Nervousness. Curiosity. Submission. He paused. Relief. I turned back to him, my posture relaxed, my expression calm. I don't see the relevance. His eyes narrowed a fraction. There it was, the beginning of irritation, subtle, but present. We moved through the house together. He showed me the spaces that mattered. The bedroom, minimal, precise. The kitchen, unused. The private gym, state-of-the-art, untouched by sweat. I behaved exactly as expected. Too exactly. My breathing remained even. My scent stayed neutral, carefully regulated by design. I didn't flinch when he stepped closer. Didn't avert my gaze when his presence pressed into my personal space. Inside, my body disagreed. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger alarms. But enough for me to notice the discrepancy. A warmth beneath my sternum, a faint tightening low in my abdomen. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with alertness. This wasn't an Omega response. It was selective. I filed the data away. Morgan stopped in the center of the living space, hands in his pockets. You're very good at this, he said. At what? Being perfect. I tilted my head. Is that a complaint? Not yet. His gaze lingered on me, assessing. But perfection tends to crack. I'll let you know if it does. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not amusement. Suspicion. We stood there, surrounded by glass and light, reflections stacking endlessly around us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, You're not reacting the way you should. I met his eyes steadily. Should is a flexible concept. His jaw tightened. He had noticed it, the mismatch between expectation and reality. Between the Omega he thought he'd purchased and the one standing calmly in his house, mapping it like a puzzle. Control had brought him this far. Now doubt had slipped in. As he turned away, leading me deeper into the house, I allowed myself a small private recalculation. This place wasn't a cage. It was an experiment. And Morgan Black had just become its most interesting variable. Night changed the house. The glass no longer reflected light, it swallowed it, turning the city outside into a living map of motion and distance. Cars traced thin veins of gold far below. Skyscrapers rose like silent witnesses. We stood in the living room, framed by the curve of the panoramic windows, two figures suspended between height and depth. Morgan poured a drink for himself. He didn't offer me one. Another choice, neatly disguised. You're unsettling, he said, not looking at me. People say that when expectations fail, I replied. That earned me a glance. Slow. Measuring. He leaned back against the glass table, posture casual. But I felt the tension coiled beneath it. The irritation from earlier hadn't faded. It had sharpened. I don't like not knowing where the edges are, he said. Then you shouldn't buy glass houses. He exhaled through his nose. A laugh, restrained. You're enjoying this. I'm observing. Morgan lifted his glass, swirling the liquid. Let's make it more interesting. There it was. A game, he continued. Simple rules. I waited. No physical force, he said. No orders you're contractually obligated to refuse. No third parties. Just us. And the objective? I asked. His eyes met mine, dark and intent. Whoever loses control first, loses. I considered the room, the glass, the height, the man who had never been told no in any meaningful way. Define control, I said. That's part of the game. Of course it was. He expected hesitation. I could see it in the subtle shift of his weight, the way he braced for negotiation. Omegas negotiated. They bargained for safety, for boundaries, for mercy. I didn't. Fine, I said. The word landed too easily. Morgan blinked. That's it? Yes. A pause. He straightened slightly. You're not asking for clarification. I understand the parameters. And you're confident you won't lose? I smiled, small and deliberate. I didn't say that. Something flickered across his face, surprise, followed by something closer to interest. Inside, my thoughts were precise and calm. I wasn't afraid of losing. Loss implied an end state. A punishment. A consequence to be avoided. I wasn't playing to win. I was playing to see. Control, I had learned, was rarely about strength. It was about fear, of exposure, of desire, of wanting something you couldn't buy. People cracked where their narratives failed them. I was waiting for that crack. Morgan set his glass down. "We start now." I nodded once. We stood there, neither of us moving, the city breathing beneath our feet. The house hummed softly, systems adjusting, cameras tracking. I felt my body again, that subtle, unclassified awareness from earlier. Not heat, not submission. Attention. Morgan took a step closer. Not invading. Testing. I didn't move. Didn't retreat. Didn't advance. "Nothing?" he asked quietly. I met his gaze, unblinking. "Disappointed?" His jaw tightened. "You're very composed. So are you." Another step. The distance between us closed to something charged but not intimate. I could feel his presence now, not overwhelming, but focused. Controlled. For the moment. The silence stretched, taut as wire. Somewhere deep in the house, a system chimed softly. Midnight. Morgan's mouth curved, sharp and slow. "This is going to be dangerous." I inclined my head, my pulse steady, my smile almost genuine. "Yes," I said. "That's why I agreed." Outside, the city glittered, oblivious. Inside the glass house, the game had begun. The game didn't announce itself. It unfolded quietly, in the spaces between movements. Morgan tested distance first. Not dramatically. Just enough to be felt. He would step closer while pretending to examine something on the wall, or linger at my side a second longer than necessary. Sometimes he stood too far away, withdrawing abruptly, watching to see if I followed. I didn't. That unsettled him more than if I had. He tested scent next. Alphas like to pretend they didn't do that. Like to frame it as instinct, not intent. But Morgan adjusted his cologne twice in one afternoon, each time choosing something subtler, warmer. Less dominance. More invitation. I registered it clinically. Cedar. Smoke. Something sharp beneath. My body responded. Not with the expected softening, not with submission or heat. Instead, my awareness sharpened. My breathing aligned with his without conscious effort. My attention narrowed. Interest, not need. "You're quiet today," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter I knew he never used. "I was quiet yesterday too." "Yes, but now you're doing it pointedly." I looked up from the glass tablet I wasn't actually reading. "Is that a formal accusation?" His mouth curved. "More of an observation." "Careful," I said. "You might start learning something." He huffed a laugh. "You talk too much for someone who's supposedly conditioned, and you assume too much for someone who bought the manual." That earned me a look. Sharp. Evaluative. Morgan shifted tactics. He lowered his voice when he spoke to me, just slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to invite closeness. He asked questions he didn't need answers to, just to hear how I responded. "Do you sleep well here?" "Yes." "No nightmares?" "None worth reporting." "You always this composed?" "Only when it bothers someone." That did it. I saw the moment he misstepped. The fraction of a second where he leaned in too far, expecting a reaction that didn't come. His alpha presence pressed outward, confident, practiced. My body answered by not yielding. Instead, my pulse steadied. My shoulders stayed loose. My gaze held his without challenge, without retreat. Morgan froze. Not visibly. But I caught the tell. The tightening of his fingers, the way his breath hitched before he corrected it. His pupils dilated, just a shade. There it was. The first signal. "You're doing that on purpose," he said quietly. "Doing what?" "Not reacting." I tilted my head. "You're reacting enough for both of us." Silence settled, thick but not uncomfortable. He straightened, stepping back as if recalibrating. "You should be more affected by this." "Should," I echoed. His jaw flexed. "You don't smell like fear." "No." Or, submission. "No. What do you smell like, Elias?" I met his gaze, feeling that unfamiliar warmth stir again. Not low and consuming but centered, alert, alive. "Curiosity," I said. Morgan laughed then. A short, sharp sound. "That's not an omega response." "I've noticed." He studied me openly now, irritation giving way to something else. something more dangerous. His earlier confidence had fractured just slightly, and through the crack seeped interest. Unwanted. Unplanned. Careful, he said. Games like this tend to escalate. I closed the distance he'd created, stopping just short of touching him. Close enough to feel the heat of his body, the tension humming beneath his skin. Then don't make the first mistake, I said. His breath caught. Not enough to lose. Enough to notice. As I stepped past him, I allowed myself a small private conclusion. The triggers were working, just not on me. Morgan didn't lose control all at once. He chipped it. The first sign was trivial, almost embarrassing in its smallness. A glass placed too hard on the table. A pause before answering a call. The way his jaw tightened when a system alert chimed half a second later than usual. Control, I learned, hates delay. You changed the lighting, he said one evening, stopping in the doorway of the living room. Yes. I didn't authorize that. You didn't forbid it. The lights were softer now. Warmer. Still glass and steel, but less surgical. I had done it deliberately, curious to see what would unsettle him. He stared at the ceiling, then back at me. Put it back. I waited a beat too long. Why? I asked calmly. Another chip. His fingers flexed at his side. Because this isn't your house. No. I agreed. It's your fortress. That one landed. He turned away sharply, muttering something about efficiency and standards. I watched him go, cataloging the reaction with quiet precision. Control wasn't his strength. It was his brace. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The way he corrected conversations when they drifted off script. How he disliked unanswered questions. How every space in his life was optimized to reduce uncertainty. People like that didn't build glass houses because they trusted transparency. They built them because they feared surprise. We talked less about rules after that. More about business. About acquisitions, investments. Partnerships that dissolved as easily as they formed. People are assets, he said once, scrolling through a holographic display. They perform. Or they're replaced. Has that worked well for you? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. There was a partner, he said finally. Years ago. Trusted him. Gave him too much access. I said nothing. He sold me out, Morgan continued, voice flat. Walked away richer than when we started. And you learned, I said. Yes. His mouth curved, humorless. Never hand someone leverage. I watched him closely then. Not as an omega observing an alpha, but as one strategist studying another. You did anyway, I said. He looked at me sharply. I didn't. You bought me, I continued gently. Proximity is leverage. Silence fell, heavy and revealing. I began to mirror him after that. When he stood too close, I stepped away first. When he withdrew, I didn't follow. I occupied the space he'd left. I adopted his cadence, his pauses, his careful neutrality. It unsettled him deeply. You're doing it again, he said one night. Frustration bleeding through his composure. Doing what? Turning this around. Is that uncomfortable? I asked. He exhaled sharply. You're not supposed to. Make you adjust? I finished. He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw something naked beneath the confidence. Fear. Not of me. Of losing the frame he'd built his life around. You think you're in control, he said quietly. I met his gaze, steady and unyielding. No, I replied. I think you need to be. That was the crack. Not wide, not fatal, but deep enough to change everything. And as the roles shifted, subtly, irreversibly, I felt something unexpected settle into place. Balance. The lab always smelled like antiseptic and electricity. I remembered that before I remembered faces. White light without shadows. Glass walls layered inside glass walls, as if transparency itself were a containment method. Floors so clean they reflected the ceiling, turning every step into a duplication. I was small then. Smaller than the silence. They didn't call me Elias. I was subject 07. Baseline response? A voice asked, distorted by glass. Stable, another replied. Emotional output within acceptable deviation. Acceptable meant low. They were proud of that. Project Zero wasn't designed to create better omegas. It was designed to erase inevitability. Alphas ruled. Omegas yielded. Betas filled the margins. The system was efficient and fragile. Someone, somewhere, decided fragility was a liability. So they tried to build choice. They stripped empathy first. Not surgically, methodically. Stimulus without comfort. Pain without explanation. Reward without attachment. They measured my reactions as if emotions were faulty circuits to be rerouted. I learned early what they wanted. Calm. Compliance. Absence. When another subject cried, I stayed quiet. When they punished us collectively, I didn't flinch. They took notes. Adjusted variables. Increased my cognitive load while dampening my affect. He's not bonding, one of them said, frowning at a screen. That's the point, another replied. He's deciding. They were wrong about that part. I wasn't deciding yet. I was waiting. I learned to observe the way glass reflected faces differently depending on the angle. I learned which technicians avoided eye contact and which lingered too long. I learned that empathy wasn't gone. It was buried, compressed under layers of enforced neutrality. They called it suppression. I called it storage. He won't imprint, someone said once. No instinctual submission. And no instinctual dominance, another countered. That's unprecedented. They argued about classifications while I memorized escape routes that didn't exist. Project Zero's goal wasn't balance. It was volatility. Someone who could tip either way. Someone who could choose to be alpha, omega, or neither, depending on context. Someone who wouldn't be governed by scent or hierarchy. Someone dangerous. Subjects before me broke. Minds fragmented. Bodies failed. They couldn't reconcile the absence of a script. Without instinct to lean on, they unraveled. I didn't. Not because I was stronger. Because I refused to perform. I survived by becoming uninteresting. Until I wasn't. They noticed when my test results plateaued. When my responses became too consistent. When I stopped reacting not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. He's masking, one of them said. Or he's empty, another replied. They never opened the glass to find out. The memories faded eventually, blurred by time and distance, but the core remained. Cold. Clear. Untouched by expectation. Standing in Morgan's glass house, I understood it fully for the first time. I wasn't an omega who resisted. I was a variable that refused to resolve. They sold me because Project Zero had failed, or so they believed. Because an experiment that didn't end in obedience or collapse was inconvenient. They didn't realize they'd succeeded. I leaned against the window, the city lights bleeding into the reflection of my face. Calm. Composed. Familiar. I hadn't survived by accident. I had survived because I knew when not to choose. And now, for the first time since the lab, the game wasn't about endurance. It was about intent. I wasn't here to be owned. I was here to decide who I would be, and who would be allowed close enough to see it. Something was wrong. Not wrong in the way alarms were wrong, or protocols, or contracts. Wrong in the way a system hesitated before choosing a response. Wrong in the way silence stretched when it should have snapped. It started in the late afternoon, when the light through the glass shifted, and the house adjusted too slowly. I felt it before I could name it, a pressure beneath my ribs, steady and contained. Not heat. Not hunger. Focus. Morgan noticed before I said anything. You're different, he said, stopping mid-sentence as we stood near the window. The city lay blurred behind him, all soft lights and distance. Your scent is unchanged, I finished. Yes, he said, frowning. That's the problem. My body wasn't broadcasting. No omega signals. No cyclical markers. The systems embedded in the house hadn't flagged anything unusual. And yet, my awareness had narrowed to a sharp, deliberate edge. Every movement of his registered too clearly. The shift of his shoulders, the controlled cadence of his breath, the way his attention kept circling back to me no matter how hard he tried to redirect it. Morgan stepped closer, then stopped himself. I didn't move. You should be feeling something, he said quietly. I am. Then why don't I smell it? Because it wasn't for him to read. The space between us tightened, charged but unresolved. This wasn't the familiar omega heat, no surrender, no desperation, no instinctive pull toward completion. This was something else entirely. Selection. Morgan's control slipped in increments so small he probably thought he was maintaining it. His voice dropped, losing its practiced neutrality. His gaze lingered too long. His hands clenched and released as if bracing against an internal current. You're not supposed to unsettle me, he said. That was never specified, I replied. He let out a sharp breath. This isn't funny. I know. We stood close enough now that I could feel the heat of him, not overpowering, not dominant. Strained, contained. He wasn't pushing. He was resisting. That realization sent a quiet thrill through me, precise and contained. I stepped closer. Just enough to make the decision unmistakably mine. Morgan stiffened. "This is where you pull back," he said, almost to himself. "Why?" I asked. "Because if you don't, I won't cross a line you don't choose to step over," I said calmly. "That's the difference." His eyes snapped to mine. The house was silent around us. Glass holding the moment like a held breath. I could feel it now, this state that refused classification. No hierarchy. No instinctual script. Just tension, coiled and aware. "You want me to need you," I said softly. "I want you to choose me." The words landed hard. Morgan's composure fractured, not shattered, but cracked wide enough to show what lay beneath. Want, stripped of entitlement. Control faltering because it had nothing to anchor to. He didn't touch me. Neither did I. The boundary held, taut and deliberate, and somehow that made it worse. Better. Dangerous in a way neither of us could fully calculate. After a long moment, Morgan stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't..." He stopped. "This isn't anything I recognize." "Good," I said. His laugh was short and unsteady. "You're not in heat." "No. And yet," I echoed. The game hadn't escalated. It had transformed. As he turned away, visibly recalibrating, I remained where I was, pulse steady, awareness sharp. This wasn't about losing control anymore. It was about discovering what replaced it when the old rules failed. And we were standing right on the edge. It happened at night. Not suddenly. Not explosively. It arrived the way storms do when the air has been too still for too long. The house was quiet, systems dimmed to night mode, glass darkened just enough to reflect us instead of the city. I found Morgan in the living room, standing too close to the window, shoulders tight, jaw set. He didn't turn when I entered. "You're awake," he said. "So are you." Silence stretched between us, dense with everything we hadn't resolved. I felt it again, that focused tension, sharpened by restraint. The almost state. The edge that didn't belong to instinct. Morgan turned then, eyes dark, expression stripped of pretense. "This ends tonight," he said. "Does it?" I asked. He crossed the distance in 3 deliberate steps. Not rushed. Controlled. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that my breath brushed his collarbone. "Stop this," he said quietly. "Or finish it." The challenge wasn't dominance. It was desperation. I felt my body respond, not with heat, not with surrender, but with alignment. Every part of me aware, calibrated, ready. This was the moment he'd been driving toward since the game began. The point where control either reasserted itself, or broke. Morgan leaned in. I raised a hand. Not to push him away. To stop us both. The gesture was precise. Decisive. His breath hitched. "Don't. I won't cross a line you can't step back from," I said. My voice was steady, even as something tight coiled in my chest. "Not like this." His hands hovered at my waist, close but not touching. For a heartbeat, I thought he might ignore me, that he might force the ending, just to reclaim certainty. He didn't. Instead, his hands dropped. The space between us felt suddenly enormous. "You think you're protecting me," he said, anger sharpening his tone. "No," I replied. "I'm protecting the choice." "That's the same thing." "It isn't." He laughed then, harsh and humorless. "You're enjoying this. I'm ending it." His eyes flared. "You don't get to decide that." "I just did." The words cut clean. Morgan stepped back abruptly, turning away, pacing once like a caged animal. His composure cracked, not outwardly, but inwardly. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, as if searching for something to grasp. For the first time, his anger had nowhere to go but inward. "This is what losing feels like," he said quietly, not looking at me. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't turn the knife. He stopped pacing and faced me again, eyes bright with frustration, and something else. Something dangerously close to understanding. "You could have taken it," he said. "You could have won." I met his gaze, calm and unyielding. "I don't want to win," I said. "I want you to choose." Silence fell, heavy and unresolved. I turned and left him there, alone with the fracture he couldn't yet name. Behind me the glass held our reflections, two figures separated by inches and an entire shift in power. They almost had passed. What came next would be worse. Morning didn't soften the house. It only made everything clearer. The glass walls were fully transparent again, the city sharp and distant beyond them. Morgan sat at the long table in the living room, untouched coffee cooling at his side. He hadn't slept. I could tell by the stillness, the way he held himself too carefully, as if rest might cause something to slip. I took the chair across from him. "This isn't about the game anymore," I said. He looked up slowly. "Then, what is it about?" "Truth," I replied. "And whether you can afford it." His jaw tightened. "You've been honest enough so far." "That's not true," I said gently. "I've been precise." I folded my hands on the table, palms open. "Not submissive. Not defensive. Intentional. You bought me as an omega," I continued. "That's what the documentation says. That's what the auction sold you. And," he said, "and it's incomplete." He leaned back, studying me, searching for the angle. "You're saying you're defective." "No," I said. "I'm saying I'm unfinished by their standards." I told him about Project Zero. Not all of it, some things belonged to me alone, but enough. The labs, the glass, the white light, the way they tried to erase inevitability by stripping instinct from identity, how omegas were expected to submit and alphas to dominate, and how Zero was built to do neither unless it chose to. "I wasn't designed to bond," I said, "or to yield, or to claim. I was designed to decide." Morgan stared at the table, knuckles whitening as his grip tightened on the edge. "That's not possible." "It wasn't supposed to be," I agreed. "Most of us didn't survive." His breath caught. "You said us." I said most. Silence spread, heavy and unmistakable. I could see it then, the collapse happening not in dramatic pieces, but in careful, devastating increments. The power he thought he held over me had depended on a lie that wasn't even his. "You didn't buy an omega," I said quietly. "You bought a variable." He looked up sharply. "Then, what are you?" I met his gaze, steady. "That depends." "On what?" he demanded. "On choice." Morgan stood abruptly, pacing once, then twice, running a hand through his hair. "Everything about this, about us, was built on assumption." "Yes." "And control," he added bitterly. "Yes." He stopped in front of me, eyes dark with something raw and unguarded. "If you're not an omega, if you're not what I thought, then this contract, this house, none of it means what you decide it means," I finished. The room felt smaller, despite the glass, vulnerable in a way it hadn't before. I stood then, closing the distance between us, not to provoke, but to make the question unavoidable. "If I'm not yours by design," I asked softly, "do you still want me?" The words hung between us, fragile and sharp. For the first time since I'd met him, Morgan Black didn't have an answer ready. And the fear that crossed his face wasn't of losing control. It was of losing me. The contract ended without ceremony. No alarms. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Morgan stood by the console embedded in the glass wall, the document hovering between us in pale blue light. His hand hovered over the termination command, fingers tense, as if the act itself required permission from something deeper than law. "You can walk out," he said. "Now. No penalties, no conditions." I studied the contract one last time. The clauses that had defined proximity as ownership, observation as care, control as protection. "Say it again," I said. He looked at me, surprised. "What? That you're not doing this to test me?" His jaw tightened. Then he exhaled slowly. "I'm not doing this to test you." A pause. "I'm doing it because I don't know how to hold you otherwise." The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than any command ever could have. The termination prompt pulsed, waiting. Morgan met my eyes. "If I release you, you owe me nothing. Not presence, not answers, not anything." I nodded. "I know. And if you leave," he continued, "I won't stop you." I believed him. That was the dangerous part. He pressed his thumb to the console. The system recognized his biometric signature, then mine. Confirmation requested, not required. The contract dissolved, line by line, until the space between us felt suddenly unguarded. The cage didn't shatter. It simply opened. I waited for the familiar sense of relief. The rush of escape. The instinct to put distance between myself and anything that could claim me. It didn't come. Instead, there was quiet. Morgan stepped back, giving me room without being asked. He didn't watch the door. He didn't follow my gaze when it flicked, briefly, toward the exit. "Why aren't you leaving?" he asked finally. I considered the question carefully. "Because if I stay," I said, "it will be because I chose to. Not because you bought me, not because I'm contained." He swallowed. "And if you go?" "Then I go," I said simply. "And that will be my choice too." Silence settled between us, not heavy this time. Honest. Exposed. I took a step toward him. Not obligation, not defiance. Decision. Morgan's breath hitched, not with possession, not with dominance. With something dangerously close to hope. "I don't know how this works without control," he said quietly. "I don't either," I admitted. "That's kind of the point." Another step. The space closed, not with pressure, but with permission. "I'm staying," I said. The words felt unfamiliar in my mouth. Not binding. Not permanent. Present. "For now." Morgan nodded once, slow and careful. "Then I won't cage you again." I met his gaze, seeing the uncertainty there, the risk he was taking by letting the structure fall. "You don't have to promise forever," I said. "Just don't build the walls back." The glass around us reflected two figures standing without barriers, without roles, without contracts. For the first time, vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing holding us upright. The house changed once the contract was gone. Not structurally. The glass was still glass. The light still refracted the same way. The cameras still existed, dormant but present. But something essential had shifted. The weight of expectation, the invisible pressure that had shaped every interaction. I felt lighter. Not because I was free from Morgan. Because I was free from definition. We sat across from each other in the living room, no screens between us this time. No hovering text. Just two people occupying the same space without rules to lean on. "What are you now?" Morgan asked quietly. The question wasn't demanding. It wasn't entitled. It was curious. "I don't know yet," I said. And that's the first honest answer I've ever had. He studied me, not as an asset, not as an anomaly, but as a variable he no longer tried to resolve. "You could choose," he said. "The systems would accept it. Alpha, Omega, you'd fit." "Yes," I agreed. "I could." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting my awareness settle inward. The instincts were there, accessible, dormant, waiting for direction. I could feel both paths open to me, equally viable. Dominance without cruelty. Yielding without erasure. Or, neither. "I don't want to fit," I said. "I want to be accurate." Morgan exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for longer than he realized. "And what does accuracy look like for you?" "Choice without obligation," I replied. "Connection without hierarchy." I opened my eyes. "I'm not an alpha. I'm not an omega." His brow furrowed. "Then what are you?" I smiled, genuine and unguarded. "Elias." The name felt different now. Unattached to designation. Complete, on its own. Morgan didn't argue. Didn't correct me. Didn't reach for the comfort of categories. He nodded once, as if accepting a truth that didn't need validation. "Then I won't try to frame you," he said. "Or claim you through a role." I stepped closer, stopping in front of him. The familiar tension stirred, but it was different now. Balanced. Mutual. "And you?" I asked. "Who are you without control?" He considered the question. Really considered it. "Learning," he said finally. "How not to be afraid of losing." I reached out, touching his hand. Lightly, deliberately. Not claiming. Not submitting. Choosing. He didn't flinch. His fingers curled around mine, warm and steady, equal in pressure. The connection didn't spark with heat. It grounded. "I don't need you to change," I said. "And I won't become something to make you comfortable." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm here." The city glowed behind us, reflected in the glass, no longer distant or unreachable. The house wasn't a cage now. It was simply a place where two people stood, unguarded. For the first time, my identity wasn't something to be proven or resisted. It was something I had chosen. And the freedom in that choice felt limitless. We didn't tear the house down. Morgan suggested it once, half serious, half provocative, standing in the middle of the living room with a blueprint projected into the air. "We could replace the glass," he said. "Something opaque, warmer." I considered it. Then shook my head. "No," I said. I like knowing where the walls are. He smiled at that. A real one. Unarmed. That became our rhythm. Mornings without schedules. Conversations without hidden clauses. He stopped hovering near control panels. I stopped mapping exits out of habit, though some habits took longer to fade. We negotiated everything now. Space. Touch. Silence. It was slower than instinct. More deliberate. More honest. I caught him watching me sometimes, not with ownership, not with hunger, but with curiosity that still surprised him. Once when I noticed, I raised an eyebrow. "What?" I asked. "You don't flinch anymore," he said. "I never did." "No," he corrected. "You used to brace." I thought about that, then nodded. "I suppose I did." He handed me a mug of coffee. Mine, exactly how I liked it. Not because a system remembered. Because he did. "Progress," I said dryly. "Careful," he replied. "I might start thinking you approve of me. Let's not get reckless." He laughed, low and easy, and the sound settled into the space between us like something earned. There was no heat cycle. No claiming. No invisible hierarchy snapping into place. Instead, there were choices. Sometimes I stepped closer first. Sometimes he did. Sometimes we didn't close the distance at all, and that was fine too. Nothing collapsed if we paused. Nothing demanded completion. One evening, standing by the window with the city spread beneath us, Morgan spoke without turning. "You know you could leave," he said. "Anytime." "I know. You don't even tell me where you go when you're out." "I don't owe you an itinerary." "I know," he said again, and this time there was something like relief in it. I watched the reflection of us in the glass. Two figures side by side, not perfectly aligned, not mirrored, just present. "I used to think transparency was control," Morgan said. "If I could see everything, I wouldn't lose it." "And now?" "And now I think it's an invitation," he replied. "To be seen without guarantees." I turned to face him fully. "That's riskier." "Yes," he said. "But better." The glass no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like openness. Light passing through without distortion. Later, as the house dimmed into evening, I caught my reflection alone for a moment. Calm. Intact. Undefined in the best possible way. I thought of the auction. The contract. The cage that never quite closed around me. And I smiled. Because the truth was simple, and it belonged entirely to me. I wasn't bought. I was seen.